Welcome back. We are now continuing our coverage of the shooting that rocked a small town in Texas over the weekend, killing 26 people and injuring several others. Joining me now to discuss the police response to the shooting is Ronald Hampton, retired D.C. Metro Police officer. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ronald.
Thank you.
Now, can you prepare for something like this?
Well, I don't believe you can. I really don't. I think these types of incidents are in the control of the person who's the perpetrator, because he has or she has the knowledge of what it is that they're going to do, how they're going to do it, when they're going to do it, and if they've done some research around it, they're in possession of all of that stuff. So it's hard to sort of figure it out. Now, preventive-wise, I think churches and people who are in churches and people in general have to be very much aware of their surroundings and the kind of things that are going on around them, as well as the individuals, the strangers, these kind of things. So that individual would have been a stranger in this community because everybody knew everybody. So they would have been able to pick him out. But whether or not they were able to do that proactively, I don't know. That's a question that's on the table right now.
What would that look like?
Well, the church could have been, they could have had a security guard. They could have been looking out for people who didn't live in that community that were coming to the services, and then not necessarily being able to do any background on them, but being able to identify them as someone who didn't belong to that church, wasn't a part of the parish of the church.
Okay. Now, there were two guys who happened to witness, I guess, what was happening, and they chased down the shooter. One of them actually wounded the shooter and then jumped in the car with another guy, and they were chasing the gunman down. Right. Now, if this didn't take place, there is a possibility there could have been more casualties, but do you agree that this is what civilians should have done?
No. I fall on the side of those who are the situations that we ought to let the police be the police. I'm not necessarily in favor of individuals who have guns and permission or license to carry a gun involved in situations where they used the gun, pulled the gun out. Say if the police had been responding to that and seen the young man with the gun, he wouldn't have been wearing a shirt saying, "I'm a good guy." The police might have shot him because they would have recognized him right away as somebody who was there. They didn't know who he was. He had a gun or a rifle, so he would have drawn the attention of the people in law enforcement and maybe put his own life at risk. So I'm kind of cautious about that. You know, there's this group of people who say that a gun can save your life. I'm not so sure that that's the case, because again, if you happen to have a gun and the police respond and you are a good guy, you're not wearing a shirt that says that, then the police are going to target on you, and then next thing you know, you might be a casualty at the scene. So it's kind of a very difficult call.
So what would you have advised those men to do if you happened to be around?
Well, you know, it's easy to second guess it, but you can always call the police and the police will respond. That's what 911 is for. In the state of Texas, you can carry a gun, you can own a gun, you can use your gun in defense of your life. So maybe in that situation, their actions actually saved some lives and further casualties that were involved in it, and they did the right thing. But that's a separate case. I believe every case has to be looked at individually and separate apart. I don't believe that there's a blanket kind of response that people ought to be taking as it relates to the gun, because again, the police had been there and seen the actions of the two guys, but didn't see the action of the original shooter, then they probably would have come to the attention of the police, and there might have been two more casualties that didn't have anything to do with the initial event.
So you wouldn't absolutely advise people to do what those two men did. It's a case-by-case basis, like you're saying. Now, when it comes to the biggest issues here pertaining to the shooting in Texas, or just mass shootings in general, would you say this has to do with mental illness or having access to guns? What do you think the biggest issue is here?
Well, I think having access to guns is an issue that we're going to have to deal with in our society, because if there's enough guns for everybody that lives in America to own a gun, then I think that's an issue. Second to that is whether or not a person should own a gun. if you have a mental illness, if you are someone who is are having problems, and they don't necessarily have to be mental problems, they could just be problems that you can't handle yourself. So should you have a gun? I know right now, if you want to get a driver's license, you had to go down to DMV and you had to do certain things to get a driver's license. What do you have to do to get a gun? And a gun is more dangerous than a car. So if we require certain prerequisites to drive a car, shouldn't we require certain prerequisites to own a weapon? And whether or not you're mentally fit to own a weapon is certainly a valid question. So I think we have to do something about mental illness in this country, because it is a problem. There's no question about it, and the stigma that goes along with it. But we also have to do something about the gun problem in this country, because we have too many guns, and plus we have no regulations as a result when it deals with assault weapons. And nobody hunts with an assault weapon. You don't go shooting hunting deer with an assault weapon. So those are the kind of issues. So if we can turn our back on it, but as we see now and have for some time now, these issues keep cropping up in our society, and what are we going to do about it?
And that's the question. So we're going to leave it right there. Thank you so much, Ronald Hampton, retired DC Metro Police Officer. Thank you so much.